right, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our town hall, Transitioning Out of the Pandemic, Rethinking Our Co-op Communities. My name is Liz McDonald, and I'll be assisting with the town hall tonight. Okay, so let's get started here. I'm just going to make sure everyone's here in the waiting room. Perfect. All right. So I'll start with the land acknowledgement tonight. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I reside is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples of the Kikite and Kwikwetlam First Nations. As one acknowledgement cannot erase or atone for centuries of violence and colonization, we invite you to commit to ourselves how reconciliation will be built on a long-term commitment of learning and action based on justice, respect, and equality. So we just have a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. Our town hall is scheduled for about an hour and a half. The session will be recorded, so you are welcome to turn off your webcam if that's more comfortable for you. There will be no formal moderator, but we have assembled a list of questions from what you submitted in advance, which our speakers will be answering tonight. You can use the chat box to ask any additional questions that might come up, which we will try to answer tonight. But if we run out of time, we will also commit to answering them after the session and sharing those responses with you all. All right, so now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers tonight. We have Michelle Cooper-Iverson, our Chief Operating Officer, and Tom Armstrong, our CEO. I'm going to pass it over to you now, Tom.
Thanks, Liz. So let's have a little chat about expectations and you know what we may get to or achieve tonight and what we may not. It's the first thing I want to say is that, well, this is the furthest thing away from a topic that that supports, you know, hard and fast absolutes that you could imagine. The legal environment is shifting, the public health environment is shifting. The whole situation evolves day to day. You know, you hear people talk. I mean, even the title of the town hall, you know, transitioning out of the pandemic, as if we know when that's going to be. You know, the recent step that was taken by the provincial government to delay the move to stage 4 is evidence of that. So, you know, as the science evolves, as the politics evolve, we are in a position of needing to draw, you know, conclusions for our communities and our members based on our best judgment of where those trends are leading. And, you know, a really good example of that is, you know, some of the questions we've had around how to interpret co-op rules and occupancy agreements in light of the Cooperative Association Act, when none of those documents, not the statute, not our model rules or occupancy agreement, were drafted with the benefit of the lens of how to apply them in a global pandemic. So in a real sense, we're making it up as we go along, but with the benefit of some very solid science to back us up and some very solid public policy. So you may find that a lot of you know, many of the answers we have to questions that you might pose that go beyond, you know, the stricter legal minimum requirements will be, we're not sure, or that will depend on choices you make, or that will depend on how you interpret what's in the best interest of your members, or what represents the best or most judicious balance between the rights of individuals and the rights of the community to remain safe and protected. So, you know, that's I think that is just, that comes with the territory now, and we'll just be disappointing ourselves if we expect to come out of a conversation like this with absolutes. I'm guessing that we're going to emerge from the, you know, the 90 minutes or so, perhaps with more questions than we have answers. I mean, the minimum legal requirements, easy, right? We'll do those. That's a slam dunk. That'll take a few minutes, but everything. You know, housing co-ops have very rarely aspired to meet the minimum legal requirements. That's a pretty low bar. So some of the questions we'll be asking turn to the issue of what are best practices, or what lessons have we learned from the pandemic that we want to carry over into whatever our reality is beyond the pandemic, and whenever we're faced by that. So that's where we that's where we find ourselves tonight. So I just wanted to encourage you to take some pleasure in the conversation and some comfort in the information, and not in the expectation of certainty. The other thing I want to say is that I know that there's a debate playing out on social media, out on the street, around masks and vaccines. We don't plan to venture into that territory tonight. That may be a disappointment to some, but I take the science on this to be settled, and I take the vaccination debate to be over. And I know not everyone shares that point of view, but that's my point of view, and that's the basis on which we're going to move forward, because we have an obligation to make sound decisions based on science, based on public health advice, that protects the greatest number of members in our communities as we can reasonably expect to protect. So I'm not going to go down the road of debating vaccine mandates and mask mandates. We can talk about what best practices represent, what's allowed within the law, but that's as far as I plan to go on that issue. So sorry if that's a disappointment to some, but I think we'll find that that's the best use of our time this evening. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say around expectations. Michelle, unless you have additional comments to make on that, I think we can roll it.
Yeah, no, I think that covers it. And so just what we're going to cover tonight, just an overview. We'll start off with what Chfbc is doing to protect members, directors, employees, and others. But then we'll be applying the public health lens to these three areas of governance, management, and community. And we've ordered the town hall with the questions that you've submitted in advance in those three areas. And then we've compiled some resources that Liz will upload into the chat, and then we'll discuss a little bit about moving forward. What are the things that we're doing right now that we'll keep doing, once we get to the other end of this. So for the questions submitted by the members, what we'll do is, so that we can have more of a conversation, Liz will upload those questions into the chat, so you'll be able to see that. But for now, let's start with what Chfbc is doing to protect members and directors. And Tom, why don't you talk to why this is an important starting point?
Well, for one thing, it's what we know. We have Chfbc is a reasonably complicated or sophisticated group of social enterprises. We run a full service federation of housing co-ops. We run a co-op management company. So our federation has members and partners. Our management company has clients and staff delivering management services. And of course, we have the most ambitious social purpose real estate developer, our community land trust in the country. And that's a whole different set of relationships and business practices. So in coming up with guidance for members, for directors, for employees, for clients, for partners across that group of social enterprises, we found that we've covered quite a lot of the questions that people are asking us about the operation of their own co-op. So we take that responsibility to lead very seriously. Not that what Chfbc is doing by any stretch becomes mandatory or obligatory for housing co-ops. That's not the kind of relationship we have, nor is it the kind we want. But it may lead us to some of the questions that we really want to be answering for ourselves and for co-ops and co-op members out there in those communities. So that's why we thought Chfbc's own operating practices in these areas was a decent starting point or jumping off point for the discussion. And of course, the other reason is that Michelle knows a lot more about it than I do. So that's a natural segue to her.
Yeah, thanks. So we did take a very thoughtful and cautious approach when we were supporting the health and well-being of our staff and our members, of course, and our clients. But we're always following the science and always the provincial health orders. And we are working towards a hybrid workplace. and really abiding with all the directives of Workplace BC and the Provincial Health Officer. So we have masks in our indoor settings. We're ensuring proper cleaning and physical distancing. We have protocols around meetings and gatherings. For us, we've limited our meetings. I'm actually in our Housing Central Conference Room. So we've limited capacity here to 10 people. And we found that meets our operational needs, and we can be physically distant with that amount of people. We are limiting business travel for our staff to only being local. And we also have, and again, this is WorkSafe BC requirements, a daily self check-in where there's a list of questions that people have to answer before coming on site or going to a co-op site as well. We are encouraging vaccinations, and we've actually made our office on Commercial Drive a mandatory vaccination zone. But we have, staff do have the opportunity and the alternative to work from home as well. It's worth mentioning that both WorkSafe BC and BC Housing are now mandating that all their staff that are interacting with the public and other employees, so they've got a mandatory vaccination in place. So we also have staff not just working in the office, but working at co-op sites as well. So we have a different set of rules, not a different, but another layer of protection for them, because they're very frontline and a little bit more at risk than somebody working at home or working at the office. So, and with respect to that, when it comes to sharing vaccination, whether someone is vaccinated or not, we have some staff that have shared their vaccination status with us and allowed us to share that, given us permission to share that information. If, for example, a staff person is going to a co-op site and the co-op says that I would like to know if your staff are vaccinated because my board wants everybody that's working here to be vaccinated. So we've been able to accommodate that with staff that have given us that information. And we're really receiving a lot of positive feedback about the hybrid work style. With our members, we are continuing online events and workshops and webinars, but we are just this month just established a set of protocols for facilitators that are comfortable and co-ops that are willing to accommodate a person coming at their co-op to provide whether it's a workshop or a chairing of some sort. It obviously depends on the co-op. It depends on the co-op's common room, if they can be physically distant or not. And those protocols also include that anybody that's attending an in-person events where a Chfbc consultant is providing those services, that everyone there is vaccinated, and it'll be up to the co-op to sign off to Chfbc saying that that's in place. And I think that really covers the one thing I just add is that before we transition to member events in person, we are planning to poll our members to see how comfortable they are to meet in person before we make any decisions on that. So what about our board, Tom? Can you talk about what the board's doing?
Yeah, the Chfbc board is really taking a very similar approach. They have been meeting only online since the onset of the pandemic. They plan to continue to do that, at least for the balance of 2021, and then of course it'll be a quarterly assessment after that. There has been a question of how do you promote the kind of bonding and that personal connection that you need to exist among directors in order for them to have the kind of relationship that leads to good decisions taken together as a group. And to the extent that there may be an opportunity to hold very small social events at the board level, that'll be done in an environment where people can be comfortable around issues like vaccination status and physical distancing, and certainly well within, far below the limits set by the public health officer. So that's going to be a very slow process. I don't think the board has any firm expectation around when it will begin to meet again in person. And in fact, as co-ops will be, and I'll come back to this in a little bit in more detail, they'll be asking themselves, what did they gain and what did they lose by moving from in-person meetings to online meetings? And I think that's a really interesting discussion for people concerned with co-op governance to have, very honestly and transparently. So that's what the board's doing, and they're being very good about supporting staff in maintaining, the office bubble to make sure that people are safe and secure. And we'll see. We don't know where we're heading in terms of member events or other events in the first, second, third, fourth quarters of 2022. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But above all, those decisions are going to be made as all of the decisions have been made so far, based on the best available science and advice from our public health officials.
Thanks, Tom. So let's move on to co-op governance. This group of questions, I'll ask Liz to copy them as we go along into the chat. We sort of grouped the questions. We did get quite a few questions, which is great, based on co-op governance. So the first one, I will take a stab at it, is can we require that all members of our cooperative are vaccinated? Well, that's a way to start off, and the answer is no. There's no legal requirement for everybody to be vaccinated in the province. And if we're speaking about if you as a co-op are mandating that everybody in your co-op become vaccinated, then the answer is no. We will get to some more questions about vaccination and about policies that boards might put in place. But the answer to that first question is no, we cannot require everybody that lives in your co-op to become vaccinated. So Tom, since we're on vaccination, let's ask the second one. Can we require that staff and contractors working at our cooperative are vaccinated?
So that's quite a different answer, and the answer is absolutely. That's a commercial relationship. And you're allowed to, within the constraints of human rights legislation, perfectly at liberty to set the terms of a commercial relationship you have with the employees or with contractors. So that's quite a common requirement. That's something we're hearing more and more frequently. Interestingly, and this is very unusual. I guess the folks at the Human Rights Tribunal, probably acting sensibly, anticipated that there might be a fair number of challenges to a vaccination or mask requirement based on the kind of commercial relationship I just described, and in fact even other employment relationships. So they went to the trouble, and I'm not aware that they've ever done this before. They went to the trouble of signaling very deliberately and very clearly in advance that they were not interested in hearing those claims, that they wouldn't be entertaining those arguments. So I took that to be quite a serious signal from a tribunal that operates absolutely at arm's length from government, that the answer that I just gave to a question like this and very many other similar questions, you can have some level of confidence in.
Great. So the next question, can we require that members who attend in-person events are vaccinated?
Is that yours or mine, Michelle?
That's yours.
That's mine. Okay. Well, it depends on the event, right? Yeah. I guess there will be situations. Excuse me. No, I was thinking of numbers and masks. So
yeah. No.
So let's focus on governance events. I'm thinking of members meetings, board meetings. You can set rules for the for the conduct of meetings that a board considers essential to the good conduct of the business of the co-op. What you can't do is deny members access to the tools of governance. So you can't say to a director, we're going to require that any director who attends a meeting in person be vaccinated, But for those who aren't, or won't be, we're not going to provide an alternative method of joining a board meeting. So there won't be any Zoom or won't be any phone dial-ins, but you have to be vaccinated to show up at a board meeting, or for that matter, a members meeting. Members have the same rights to attend members meetings as directors to attend board meetings. So there's the trade-off, right? You can set the conditions for people being physically present. You can't use those conditions to deny directors or members access to the decision-making tools of the co-op. So that's where you might have to be somewhat flexible in the alternative arrangements or the accommodations that you're willing to make available for others.
And who would you say, Tom, for everyone that's listening, who has that responsibility of setting those conditions?
It begins and ends with the board. The board is responsible for managing the business of the co-op. That's clear black letter law under Section 76 of the Co-op Act. So that's where it starts. There may be, I can imagine co-op members making an argument that's in effect setting policy, and the policies have to be approved by the members at a meeting called for that purpose. I think there's an argument to be made also that the provisions of the public health emergency override that, and boards have to make decisions that are in the best interest of the co-op and protect the health and safety of members.
And that echoes what you said at the beginning, where the rules and occupancy agreements weren't made within a pandemic.
They weren't, and that's something we're wrestling with. So the strict application of some versions of the rules and occupancy agreement would seem to be at odds with the kinds of sound and careful decisions that boards have to make around the promotion of member health and safety. And I think, I would take the view that until a decision made by a board through that lens is successfully challenged, then you're good to go. And that challenge could show up in a complaint to the Civil Resolutions Tribunal or to the BC Supreme Court. The former being a lot easier and less expensive than the latter.
Interesting, and this time there's not a lot of case law that exists, because this is the first time we're going through most of this.
Well, no, that's the thing, right? I mean, it's only legislatures and courts that make law. Courts make it through decisions that then become binding precedents on future decisions, and legislatures do it by passing statutes. So other than the public health orders we've seen and the public emergency orders, so we don't have a lot to go on. So that's why I said earlier that rather than there being some kind of code that we can refer to, there are some basic principles in place, and we need to work from them to draw the right inferences. If we see something being legislated for the landlord-tenant relationship, we need to ask ourselves, okay, is it reasonable to infer that requirement extends to the relationship between a co-op and a member, even though co-ops aren't bound by the Residential Tenancy Act? Well, that's, again, we said it right at the beginning, there are a lot of questions we don't have a firm yes or no to, and that's certainly one of them.
Okay, Liz, did you want to read out the next question?
Great. All right. So number 4, many people are not willing to get vaccinated in our co-ops, and it is unclear what the rules are around gatherings. I would like some clarity on whether people who are not willing to declare their vaccination status can be prevented from attending in-person gatherings.
I think that Tom's question was very much alludes to that, about just setting the precedent on, or making decisions on what will happen at in-person gatherings, but also layering on, when it comes to a governance point of view, opportunities for members and directors, if it's a board meeting, to participate in another manner as well. So, and then it also talks about the questions of they're not willing to declare their vaccination status. Then if your policy is that you have to be vaccinated in order to attend an in-person board meeting, for example, then they just wouldn't be allowed to attend the meeting if they don't want to declare their vaccination status either way. Anything you want to add to that? I think, Tom, we kind of spoke about that in the last 3 vaccination questions.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Michelle, if we had built an opportunity in this section to talk about the the rules that are set down under the Act and by the registrar for things like AGM deadlines and electronic meetings. Is that coming up on our list, or should we?
I think we do have a question that talks about general meetings, just generally, how do we handle general meetings? We can talk about it there.
Okay.
Does that sound, that's coming up?
Totally.
Okay. So the next question, who determines, you just answered this one, but I'll just read it out anyways. Who determines safety protocols, and what do we do if a member is not practicing these protocols? So the second half of that question, so the board has determined, I will make up a protocol, mask wearing in the laundry room, and a member is not following that protocol. What can the co-op do?
Well, it depends how that protocol has been established, right? And this is where what I'm going to say might be a little bit at odds with what I said earlier around the board's ability to override some of the policies of the co-op in the, if it feels the situation is urgent enough. But obviously the first level of enforcement or response on things like this is persuasion, conversation, peer and neighbor pressure. But if it becomes an actual enforcement issue, well, that's where the terms of the Co-op Act can't be overridden. So, you all know that there are only 3 grounds for termination of membership in a co-op, and that's where we're talking about when we're talking about enforcing protocols. That's where this would have to eventually lead in order for it to have any heft. But it's non-payment, breach of a material condition of the occupancy agreement, and conduct detrimental to the co-op. Well, conduct detrimental is a hazy notion at best. So the co-op might be in a better position if it had a formal policy on the books establishing those protocols. And then, of course, a breach of the policy by reference is a breach of the occupancy agreement, and that could be the avenue for an enforcement action, or at least a demand to cease the kind of behavior that was constituting the breach. So that's with any luck, you wouldn't have to go that far. But in the end, if you have some intransigent members who are just not willing to act with due regard for the safety of their neighbors and the community, that might be where you have to go. But I would say I gave kind of short shrift to the persuasion and education piece up front. It took me longer to deal with the enforcement, but I would reverse the onus or the emphasis in actual practice and spend a lot of time on education and persuasion before you got to the formal enforcement mechanism.
And enforcement being fines, or it's a member termination seems like a far extreme.
It is, and oddly enough, that's really the situation that co-ops find themselves in respect of a lot of, like if you take this out of the pandemic environment, other than fines, which aren't really that, historically that effective, you don't have a lot of mechanisms available to you within the co-op governance system under the provisions of the Cooperative Association Act that fill that gap in between an initial breach and a termination action. That's why I said the emphasis ought to be on education, conversation, persuasion, so that you don't find the formal mechanism has to kick in.
Yeah, because fines will lead to housing arrears, and that's just a slippery slope.
Well, we've canvassed that issue many times, and non-payment of a debt owed to the co-op is a ground for termination, but the courts have typically interpreted that to be housing charges or share purchase installments. If you end up with a $40 fine on the books for not showing up at a meeting or not wearing your mask in the laundry room, it's your prospects at the BC Supreme Court for having a termination upheld based on a $40 debt are not that great, and members will pretty quickly avoid having to test that by coming up with the $40 after you've spent $5,000 in legal fees to get that far in the process. So you can tell I'm not a big fan of fines under almost any circumstances, and that's pretty much why.
Okay, great. So the next couple questions are about meetings, general meetings. And I know that many co-ops, even last night, we learned some co-ops are successfully doing their AGMs online. That's working really well. They're having the best attendance, really great attendance. Others we've heard are having their AGMs in the parking lot. And we even spoke to one co-op last night that is doing a combination of both. So, so the first question is, will housing co-ops be legally allowed to deny access to unvaccinated board members?
Okay, so this is the board meeting question.
Yeah.
And I think we tackled this one earlier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the short answer is a big yes, but. Okay, the sure, you can, as our board has, say that if you're going to show up to a meeting in person, that you need to be vaccinated. But you can't leave it at that, right? You have to say, now comes the accommodation issue. And that's where I think, even though you could argue on a strict reading of the Co-op Act that if a meeting is attended by a majority of the directors or members, to flip the context, in person, that you don't have to provide an electronic option. But I think if you've created a rule that limits access in person, then you are obliged, as an act of accommodation, to make an electronic or telephone option available to directors who either can't or won't be vaccinated. So yeah, I think so. So the answer is yes, you can require vaccination for in-person meetings, but you also you can't deny access to a meeting to a legally elected or appointed director, so you have to provide that other option.
And I think you and I have differing points on this point of view. I think that when you have a board meeting where you've mandated that you automatically give two options, one in person and an automatic link for an online meeting. That way you're not forcing the person that is unvaccinated to disclose that they're not vaccinated.
Well, that's fair. And in fact, some people would object in principle to being asked to disclose their vaccination status, even if they are vaccinated. And that's a position that we find people taking. And to approach it your way, you just automatically offer the in-person or the online access is a way of avoiding having to have that difficult conversation, because people don't have to reveal why they've opted for a one option or another. Although you still do have to, where you do have to check is for the director who wants to show up in person, right? At that point, you do need confirmation that there's a double vaccination there. So, there's room for flexibility, but not around the question of who actually gets to sit around the table. And again, this is not the law. We've moved squarely into the territory of, from legal obligations to best practices, or what we would consider to be best practices.
Yeah, and I would just add, for best practices, once you know that your directors are vaccinated, there's no need to have a copy of their vaccination. You don't want that sort of documents floating around. You just know that they're vaccinated, and you can move on and continue on with the business and future business as well. So anything else you want to say to co-ops about handling general meetings, AGMs?
Well, I'd say the same basic rules would apply. I mean, some co-ops seem to be inclined to be stubborn about this and say, well, we've been waiting all this time to get back to in-person meetings, so let's get there, and we're going to abandon all the options that we have been using for the last 18 months or more to allow members to participate electronically or virtually in these meetings. And I think the same rule should apply. Members have a right to be present and vote on all matters coming before the members that are there, within their purview under the Co-op Act. So if you're going to set what some would regard as a perfectly reasonable restriction on in-person attendance, whether it comes from the the mandated limit, the 50 or less limit on indoor gatherings, or from a decision the co-op takes around a vaccination requirement, you need to create that alternative for people to attend by other means, because that's not controversial anymore. I know that it's a very rare co-op that has an explicit restriction on electronic meetings built into the rules, and the combined impact of the act and the regulation mean that electronic meetings and attendance electronically count as being there in person at a meeting, and they're perfectly permissible as a way of conducting co-op business at the board or member level, unless the rules explicitly prohibit it, and very, very few rules prohibit it. Certainly our model does not. So, I really, this is a conversation that I'm really anxious to have with our members. And in the rush, and in some cases, what I think is an undue rush to get back to in-person meetings, I think it's worth a pause. Just to ask ourselves, what did we gain and lose in the move to virtual meetings? And what will we gain and lose by a complete return to in-person meetings? Because I can tell you by the number of electronic meetings that we've been asked to support, and the feedback we've been getting from members on what their experience in those online meetings has been like. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to be preserved in that. We spent a long time talking about the move to electronic meetings as creating barriers for people who had connectivity issues, or weren't comfortable in an online environment, or didn't have internet access. We never really spent a lot of time, pre-pandemic, talking about the barriers that co-ops put up to in-person attendance at meetings, whether it be mobility issues, or childcare, or scheduling issues, or anxiety issues, mental health issues. That prevented people, well, and let's be honest, behavior issues, the kind of conduct that people were exposed to at in-person meetings, that was very unpleasant in a lot of cases, and is much easier to control in an online environment. Those are things that I think co-ops need to ask some serious questions about as they decide whether to move back to an in-person environment or a hybrid in-person virtual environment. Is make sure, I think we need to make sure that we don't lose what we may have gained by being forced onto that virtual platform before we jump off it again. So lots of interesting questions to ponder around the conduct of meetings. The technical stuff is taken care of. I mean, the automatic extension on the deadline for conducting annual meetings has come off, but the registrar is routinely approving written requests for exemptions or delays up to 6 months beyond the deadline. So that's not a problem. Electronic meetings from a legal point of view, not a problem. So we don't need to spend our time talking about what the legal requirements are. We can focus wholly on what the best practices are, and that's what I'm hoping we can help our members explore.
An interesting discussion that we had at earlier is that there's the business of the AGM, which is straightforward and can be done online, and any sort of social or community building could be a separate event. And maybe some co-ops had their AGM with a social event, but it's just a matter of rethinking how you which is the title of today's session, but rethinking how you did that AGM, where you can still conduct the business online and then create another avenue for some sort of social event when it's safe to do those kinds of things in person.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm hearing a skewed version of opinion out there among our members, but frankly, I have not heard a single person say we used to have better meetings in person than we're having online. Not one. I hear people say, I miss my neighbor. I miss the connection. I miss the opportunity to trade crosstalk. I miss the chance just to just to socialize. And I think that's mainly what people are missing. Well, I'd encourage people to think beyond, the 2 or 3 members meetings they have every year as the principal opportunity to create those social bonds and social connections, and start imagining what that community development might look like. Because just because people are able to, legally or otherwise, able to attend a meeting that's called in person doesn't mean they're going to be comfortable doing so. And let's have regard for the care we need to show each other and our neighbors and members and shareholders, and try and boost those comfort levels, not compromise them.
Great. So Liz, why don't we move on to co-op operations? And if you can read the question about the common rooms, we'll give Tom a break from speaking.
You mean give people a break from listening to me? Over to you.
All right. So, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing so that we can have the focus be on our speakers here. Give me 1 second. All right, so question is it safe to open up our common room? Do we need policies? And is the common room considered a personal gathering or an organized gathering?
So I'll tackle that one. Based on everything that we've been reading from the provincial health orders, it is safe to open up your common room, but you do want to set some sort of capacity limits. Again, co-ops are technically not considered what the provincial health order describes as public, because co-ops are on private property. So it's going to be up to the board to set policies and also protocols for the use of the common room. But best practice does recommend setting some sort of occupancy level, possibly at 50%. Right now, the indoor gathering is the higher of 50 people or 50% of the occupancy capacity, which would be set for your co-op's common room as well. So definitely, yes, you would need some sort of policies, because likely your common room is being used, say, for parties or somebody's booking a family event. So you definitely want to have some sort of procedures and protocols around that. It would be considered a personal gathering, not an organized gathering, and that's a difference. But I will add that when it comes to the common room, depending on how your co-op is using it, you want to be careful that if you're having some sort of physical activity like a yoga class, that it doesn't fall under the provincial health order, because the health order does speak about indoor spaces and it talks about fitness activities. So a little bit different if it's a personal gathering of family dinner and you have a protocol for that. But also, I would say if you're having a fitness activity or having a yoga class, then you do have to look at the provincial health order, because there are mandates around that as well.
So Michelle, remember when you said that we wouldn't necessarily see eye to eye on every question that came up tonight? So I largely agree with what you said. But I'd say, the most important part of this question is the very first part. Is it safe to open up our common room? And the rest of it is around really pointing toward what the legal restrictions are. And, I would say that you absolutely want to start with the legal restrictions, but then look around, right? So the people that drafted these public health orders, they weren't thinking, top of mind for them. It's like every public official who's drafting a health, they don't, for most of their working day, they don't even think about housing co-ops, right? We're such a tiny dot on the landscape that our particular situations don't really come up. So, I would say in answer to this question, look around and see who is affected by the kind of restriction that's being put in place here. And I, look at things like banquet halls and reception halls and whoever else is being, and if a co-op meeting room, when it's full of members at a meeting, looks a lot like that kind of gathering, you don't have to apply those restrictions, because you technically don't fall under the definition, but maybe you should, because of the impact it might have on members. Because the issue isn't really, are we complying with the law? It's, are we keeping our members safe? That should be the big question, and that's why I was like I like that the way that question's phrased, because it covers the whole gamut. So maybe we're not disagreeing, but we're answering the question maybe from different ends.
We've been known to disagree. So, so are you saying yes? Yes, it is safe to open up the common room. I say yes.
I don't know.
On the common room and the space in your community.
I don't know. I've seen some, like I've been in a lot of co-op common rooms, and all common rooms are not created equal.
No.
They're some are postage stamp size with crappy ventilation, and others are huge expanses with with big sliding doors that open up to the outside, and those are two very different questions that have two very different answers when it comes to those. So I'd say it depends on the context and the number of people and the room itself.
Yeah, so the co-op would set the occupancy. Obviously, ventilation is actually one of the protocols that have to be in place when it comes to for indoor spaces. So so yes, if it's a very small square room, and then perhaps not. But if I may pick on Killarney Gardens, they have an amazing common room, and it's a little bit different in that case, I think.
Yeah, I'll be quiet now.
Well, no, I'm finished the question. I don't want you to be quiet, because the next question is very exciting about mandatory unit inspections. So this is a doozy. We have mandatory unit inspections in my co-op, and the inspection committee is not advising members if they are vaccinated or not. Members do not feel comfortable allowing the inspection. What are your thoughts? Because this is this is a good one because of the access to the unit, right?
No, so this is a great example of the comment we made earlier, that the Co-op Act and our own model, the model rules and occupancy agreements, were not drafted with a global pandemic in mind. And how could they have been, right? So the occupancy agreement, if you have the standard agreement, is really crystal clear. The co-op absolutely has the right to enter a co-op home, usually for a non-emergency on 24 hours notice for what's defined as a reasonable purpose. And right in the standard agreement, inspections are given as an example of what a reasonable purpose is. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. That is like universally present in co-op occupancy agreements. But so, along comes the co-op to exercise its right of access, and members who are obliged to grant that access now feel that doing so is a threat to their own health and safety. And it's not, we've seen some pretty imaginative, I'd go so far as to say bogus claims used to bar the co-op from access to a home for a reasonable purpose. But this wouldn't be, if this is a fear that's genuinely held based on a medical condition or just the nature of the unit, then yeah, I mean, if I were that member, I'd be saying go away and come back when you can assure me that my home is going to be inspected by somebody who's been vaccinated. Co-ops have all kinds of other options available to them. Of course, they can invite the member to vacate the unit for an hour and hang out in the common room while the inspection is being conducted, or even move around within the home to be in a room where the inspectors aren't. Sure, those are in some cases reasonable accommodations, but in other cases the members aren't able to do that comfortably. Maybe they're infirm, maybe they have mobility issues, and maybe it's just still not comfortable for them. So there's an example where boards have to lead, right? You've got a situation where the strict legal framework that you operate under is maybe at odds with the context you find yourself in. And that context is something that none of us have any experience in. Well, I mean, the last 18 months, we have plenty of experience, but before that, none, a global pandemic. So what's the reasonable accommodation? And I'm sure there is one. It would sure be great if it was obvious to everyone that unit inspectors should be vaccinated, if not, and masked, but that's not an absolute or 100% guarantee either, is it? So you got to work together. Remember, this is not a an us versus them proposition. It's an area where people should be willing to work together toward a reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, and I mean, I would add, this particular question talks about an internal committee of co-op members doing the inspections, but it would be no different than if it was a third-party contractor that was doing the unit inspection as well. Just to put you on the spot, sometimes the unit inspection is a timely matter, right? So it's a move out. How would the co-op handle that?
Well, the co-op subject to the same legal restrictions, even if it's even if there's time pressure around, say, a unit turnover, the same notice provisions apply. Mm-hmm. So where, you know, a co-op in another, if it's an annual inspection, you know, that's part of a preventive maintenance program, maybe there's more flexibility around the timeline. But if it's a unit turnover, no, that's pretty tight, right? So you do have to be ready to work with people to come up with something that respects the co-op's right to conduct co-op business, but keeps members safe and healthy.
Yeah, and it's also for the person going into the unit. I know, I mean, this was in the heart of the pandemic before, not at this stage, but we at that point we had videos, so people who got on their phones and they just walked around the unit, and that's what worked. I don't know if it would still work now, but it's certainly, we'll get to sort of things that we take away, but that's certainly some creative ways that we came up. You know, this was right in the heart of the pandemic for move out inspections and move in as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Liz, you want to ask the question about masks, I guess?
Yeah, so kind of bringing it back to the common room. Is the mask mandate for public spaces applicable to our co-op common room?
So the definition of public places the co-op common room does not fall under that definition. That said, if you get the running theme of tonight, there is the set protocol saying co-op common rooms, but it is obviously a best practice to have a mask mandate, but the board would have to set that policy in place, put signage up, and so forth. But if you were to follow the strict letter of the law, what the provincial health order defines as a public place is something that's available to everyone in the public, not just everybody in the co-op. So that's my interpretation of it. And I think Tom agrees with me on this one. Good. Okay. So the other question about management services.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this question came in from someone who provides management services for a housing co-op. I've been working at home and going to the co-op to pick up and drop off items and meet with the board liaison. The co-op is insisting that I return to working on site, but I'm afraid for my personal safety. Members are not always wearing masks. I don't know who is vaccinated, and the co-op office is poorly ventilated.
So this is a great question because one, the place of work, which is the co-op office, and that's really what you need to focus on. As a co-op, you are providing, whether it's employee is directly hired by the co-op, or if the employee is hired by a third party. If it was a third party, then the co-op site is a secondary place of location, and the person's employer is what the WorkSafe calls the prime contractor. So it's their responsibility to monitor any place that the individual is working. And the individual always has a right to refuse unsafe work. That's a WorkSafe BC regulation. So to answer that question, what was the question? Is it just a statement? What did they do? They have the right to refuse unsafe work. And if they're a direct employee of the co-op, they have the right to refuse that work. If they are coming from a third party, say one of our own property management or another property management, then they would work with their primary contractor, according to WorkSafe, which is their employer, and have the employer either advocate on their behalf to the co-op site or make other arrangements. But ultimately, the right to refuse unsafe work is just the response to this question.
Yeah, it depends who your employer is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's the co-op, then you have a certain recourse. If it's a management company, especially a management company operating in the co-op housing sector, then whoever this person is should be saying to their employer, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you putting me in a situation where I feel that my health and safety is compromised? And then it's up to, I mean, I can only speak for Coho, but then it's up to the management company to engage the client co-op in that conversation and say, we won't be able to provide on-site service except, unless a certain set of conditions are in place that give us the assurance that our staff will be safe. And it's about people taking their responsibilities for that seriously and acting on them.
Yeah, this is definitely a theme that we're experiencing, where co-ops are anxious, and I would say anxious and very they're very anxious to get into in-person meetings, and they're going back into in-person board meetings. And like you said, you've got to talk about the co-op common room. They're not created equally, but so is the co-op wherever the board meets, and they're often small board spaces. And not all co-op boards are practicing physical distancing, and yet they are insisting that their staff person present the management report in person when that can be done on an online forum. And so I would say that this is definitely something that we're having, but we're advocating on behalf of our staff for a safe work environment as well. So, sorry, I'm in the, yeah, there it is. This is, I'm in the conference room. I didn't move for a second. So this one is for you, Tom. Why is CHFBC and Coho mandating vaccinations and wearing of masks? I find that illegal and unconstitutional.
Okay, well, as I said at the outset of the meeting, I'm not going to the second part of this question unless the author of the question is a justice of the BC Supreme Court. Then the charge that it's illegal or unconstitutional is without a lot of foundation. So the short answer is because it's the smart thing to do. We have as a priority the health and safety of our employees, our members, our clients. And we think that a vaccine mandate and a mask mandate is the best way to promote the broadest possible conditions of health and safety that we can. So as I said earlier, we're following the science and the advice of our public health officials, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And I think if you look in the news, I don't think a day goes by without the announcement that one or another government body or private entity is introducing a thorough mask mandate and vaccination mandate. The only thing that's differing is the effective dates. So we've seen everything from October through next January. But I think we're right in the middle of the pack on this one. I don't think we're at the cutting edge at all, and maybe that changes. We had an interesting discussion earlier today about how we will know when we can say we're now in the post-pandemic age. I have no idea. I'm not even making the assumption that there is going to be a post-pandemic age because the evidence so far hasn't led us there. When it does, maybe some of these protocols will get relaxed, but not until.
Yeah. That was an interesting conversation. So I think we can move on. I think that's co-op operations, right, Liz? Okay, so we can move on to co-op community. And a couple questions here. Actually, one for the audience. But the first one is, and I'm not too surprised at this one. I think, Tom, you and I can both, from the feedback from the member services team, members feel that other members are harassing them when asking if they have had their COVID-19 vaccination. They feel that this is an invasion of privacy. Where does CHFBC stand on this? And I guess it depends on the situation, on where they're being asked. If the if the co-op has an in-person event and has required that there's a vaccination protocol or mandatory vaccination protocol to attend an in-person event, and you're being asked to prove that, then that really isn't harassment. That's following through on the policy. And it's a little bit different if you're walking around the co-op and your neighbor just asks you if you're being vaccinated or not. Tom, I know this is a hot topic for you, so I will let you give us your thoughts on this one.
I'm not taking the bait on this one, but when I gave you my answer earlier the day when we talked about this town hall, you said it was incredibly rude. So I'm just gonna, the neighbor to neighbor, mind your own business. But when it's a piece of the co-op's governance framework and designed to keep people safe and healthy, then that's not harassment. That's public health, and that's being proactive through a public health lens. But yeah, if members, I mean, the way I read this question is as members feel that other members are harassing them, asking them if they have COVID vaccination, you're not obliged to tell your neighbor that or anything else about your personal health status. So I'm going to stop there, Michelle, because then that leads me to where you said I was going to get in trouble. So
yeah, that's right. Okay, so the next question, we're going to open up the chat and invite you to answer this question, which is, we have members who have differing views on vaccinations and masking, and there have been some unpleasantness. And I think that's a very tame word based on this person's description of what's going on. Are there other co-ops experiencing this, and what are they doing to build community? And I invite everybody to put something in the chat or share their co-op story as well. Have you heard anything about this, Tom, other than about this polarizing issue at co-ops? I've received quite a few calls, and I know so has our team.
I haven't actually. So, I mean, you know, the odd story about a little bit of conflict, but no, those calls haven't come to me. If they've come to our team, I'm interested to hear about them.
Yeah, the ones that I've received are some of the questions that came up is that, you know, that the board setting a protocol for mandatory vaccination or proof of vaccination to attend an event. And why is the board doing that? Does the board have the right to do that? So that's certainly one angle. And then of course there's the vaccination or anti-vaccination advocates and masking advocates that are sharing their opinions with, you know, with the board and co-op members as well. So those are kinds of the things that are coming up. But I think we've answered those questions with respect to in the co-op governance section of this town hall about what the responsibility of the board, especially in the fact that the rules and occupancy agreement were not created with a pandemic in mind, and making sound decisions for the health of their co-op members. So one person in the chat has said that there are differing points of view, but it's still a friendly atmosphere. So that's good to hear. And our co-op hasn't experienced a lot of unpleasantness. Lots of socializing is taking place outdoors, and a successful outdoor event this summer. Lots of supportive chatting on Facebook page. All is calm at my co-op. And I think it's fair to say that years of developing a caring culture combined with clear communication and good board leadership is why. And so not many people have this issue, and a lot of people are doing things outside as well. Meetings are virtual, members are being respectful. So that's good. That's very good to hear for our co-op communities. All right.
And a real affirmation, right, of how co-op values influence behavior even in stressful times. So that's encouraging to hear. I think, as I said before, I think the really interesting conversation is going to be, what shape and form do co-op meetings take? As you know, we move to stage 4 and beyond, and restrictions come off. I think that's going to be very interesting, because the conversation about what makes a good meeting, and especially in terms of that you know, virtual versus in person, can be held entirely outside the context of a global pandemic, because based on the experiences our members have had attending and participating in meetings that have been held online, the issues don't really center around whether there's a pandemic or not. They center around what good governance is and what safe, respectful, civil, efficient meetings look like. And that's a question that we get to wrestle with or without a pandemic, right?
Okay, so I have a question, and this talks about changing of the rules and occupancy agreement of a co-op. So I'll read it into the meeting. Can the co-op amend the occupancy agreement to incorporate pandemics? This would be a member meeting. I'll let you answer that, Tom.
Yeah, I think so. No, I have to say I haven't given much thought to how that could be done, but you know, some of the examples we used, you know, around the right of access to a unit for inspection or other purposes, that could be modified to give people more latitude in what they can require of inspectors or you know, other contractors. Yeah, again, I haven't given it a lot of thought, but I'm sure it could be done.
Would you say it's better to be done through a policy change as opposed to a rule amendment? Because policies, well, I guess it depends on the co-op. Co-ops have members approve policies.
Yeah, it could be. You'd have to be careful that you're not creating a conflict, of course, between the terms of the policy and the terms of the occupancy agreement, because then the occupancy agreement takes precedence anyway. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's an interesting question. But what creates exceptions to the normal way of conducting business as it's expressed through the rules and the occupancy agreement of a co-op?
Yeah. And just another comment about the very little conflict among members. Again, this is, I really do think, I actually was on a panel about organizational culture, and I think it transcends to co-op culture as well. Going into the pandemic with such a strong, clear culture is probably has made a lot of co-ops and very successful in this transition. So an outdoor concert, physically distancing, and all the meetings are online. It's more pleasant and more respectful. So that's really great. Another comment that all our meetings are virtual and likely to be in the foreseeable future. And can vaccination be required for new members? I would think we answered the question around there's no mandatory vaccination for your membership at large. So
no, but the question, I think another way to interpret this question is, can vaccination status be a condition
of
membership in the co-op for new applicants, or I guess transfers? And I don't know. It's an interesting question. I haven't heard it posed before, and I don't know the answer.
So I think it's my turn not to speak. Okay, so if there's no more in the chat, I think we can move on to what I think you've been looking forward to, Tom. What practices are we going to keep? So I'll start by just saying that some practices that I know that we've been doing that have been working really well, that our co-ops have said that are working really well, and they'll keep. I know some co-ops are using the online forum to engage more members for like movie nights and those kinds of things. The other thing is AGMs or board meetings. That's as well. That is something that is we've been told, and our own experience as well, that it's working well, and even after the pandemic, it's something that we can look at keeping some sort of hybrid model of sorts. Any other practices, Tom, that you're thinking about? And of course, put it in the chat as well. What are the things that you guys are that everyone's doing that you'll want to keep after whenever this thing is over?
Yeah, and I'm keen to hear from the people online. I mean, you've already heard me say, and I think in the comment Liz made in the chat, you know, all of our meetings are online and are far more pleasant and respectful than they ever were in person. And that, you know, I'm hearing that over and over and over again. The I guess the kind of discipline that a virtual platform imposes on a meeting, it really does curb some of the things that, you know, pre-pandemic we would hear complaints about literally daily, and sometimes more than once a day, that people were just being turned off. I mean, they look at the obligation to attend meetings in the rules or the occupancy agreements, and then they do attend them and they're turned off by the behavior they experience or the way they're treated. And that, you know, we don't hear those complaints now in that. I'm not saying the virtual platform is perfect. There are things you can't do with it, but I think that's going to be, as I said, a really interesting conversation. But, you know, what else? I mean, I think we were forced into, you know, an environment where we had to cope, you know, with a pandemic. And for a while, every type of experience we had was a negative experience because something we were forced to do by a public health officer or by the Solicitor General. But, you know, now co-ops, as they always do, have adapted with enormous resilience and creativity. And I think that has generated some practices that will survive the pandemic. And I'm kind of keen to, we're seeing it now kind of pop up in the chat. I'm keen to hear what's, you know, what those practices will be.
Yeah, so I'll read some of the chat. And again, I'm really echoing about the high participation levels that general meetings online have enabled. And we may allow members without a computer to meet in our hall for the meeting. Generally, the meetings are much shorter, and board meetings as well as some committees. Again, and echoing shorter meetings, less chit chat, off topic, really sort of focused agenda, and getting through the business of the meeting much more efficiently, much more comfortable from our own homes. I do know we've had a lot of feedback on not needing to have childcare because they can now attend a board meeting. So it's more inclusive. If you couldn't get a sitter and couldn't go to a board meeting before, you can. Certainly, that's not the case anymore. You can take it from your home. Yeah,
Bill's got an interesting comment or question there. They talk about hybrid meetings, right? Where some people would show up in person within the limit of the capacity of the room, or they're just not ready or willing to or able to move into a virtual environment, and then people who are online. And we actually, I think we're far from having a uniform view on that. Even in the office, because the point you make, Bill, about whether or not people who are online will be somehow disadvantaged in that process, kind of that out of sight, out of mind thing. We don't have enough experience in that to know yet if that's going to be a significant enough factor to recommend against hybrid meetings. I think we're going to be taken there anyway. I did get I see the note in the chat now, and I got an email from Sue earlier that Sue is one of our most experienced chairs and chaired a hybrid meeting that apparently went really well. So I think we need to approach this with the same creativity and determination to make it work as we have everything else, and I think we'll find out the jury's out on that right now, though, I think.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I think she's brought up a question about, and I think we've heard this a lot in the pandemic and even right now, where people without computers or people without access. I know that our team works closely where people can attend by telephone, and so they can listen into the meeting. But I also know that some other co-ops have, because they have small spaces, they have, I think one co-op I spoke to had 7 or 8 people that could attend the meeting in the co-op common room, that sort of hybrid, and everybody else was online. So those spots were saved for people that didn't have access to technology. And I know that, I think that co-op was a hybrid meeting and it went very, very well.
The one thing that I would flag, because I've sat in on a couple, again, not enough to be able to be confident about making a really general statement, but I have noticed in the meetings I've sat in on, in the hybrid meetings, that while the members are more likely to have a really strong, reliable internet connection, the co-op isn't.
Yeah.
And the real connection issues happen in the co-op common room, and not in members' homes, where where they'll have a good, reliable internet connection, especially if they're part of our telecom program. So I think co-ops, in order to give this a fair chance, are going to have to overcome any resistance they might have to investing in a little, the technological platform. It's absolutely a worthwhile investment to make sure there's reliable internet service, good speakers, a large high definition TV. So all the things that might be might take to make a hybrid meeting work, co-ops are going to have to be willing to invest in that. And electronics are not expensive these days, so it really doesn't take a big it's not a big dollar hit on the budget.
No, and if they're part of the TELUS program, they can certainly work with that as well. The other thing that's in here, I don't see, there's a new message here, is some of the social events. I did talk about movie nights. Somebody talks about a virtual book club. I think those are really, really great. And the other thing that we have that co-ops have said they would continue is interviewing, new member interviews, and interviewing new members online, and also showing of the unit, the homes, virtually, like making a recording of the unit and sharing it with members, as opposed to having somebody scheduled to come in at a certain time and see the unit. So those are some of the things that I think that would be really good to carry forward, moving forward, to keep that. I think that makes a lot of sense and saves a lot of time. Anything else that you guys see, or shall we move on to the next question? There's one more question, isn't there, Liz?
I think we just inherited an assignment from Anne's suggestion in the chat. Maybe some suggestions around technology. So if we can put together, and we do have the resources to do this, like a standard meeting room package that co-ops could source, that we could even maybe even build it into our group buying program as part of a new service we offer to members. So, but again, it's not a huge investment, and it will make a huge difference.
And we did have a couple co-ops that actually used this room that I'm in right now, because there's an internet. It's the Chfbc's offices, and they had, I think, 10 people in here, or no, I think it was 6 at that time. We had a limit of 6, and then they had everybody else on Zoom here, just like I'm talking to you. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities. Good. So there's another question. So I think Anne already beat us to this one about what more you would like from us. Thank you for anticipating our next question. But this is our final question for the night. I think how are we doing for time, Liz?
Got 5 minutes.
Okay, great,
Go.
great. So the question is, what else can we do as your membership federation to assist you, whether it's currently in this phase or moving forward, so that we can transition out of the pandemic. And we will wait while you type something in the chat, unless there's nothing. Okay, I will take that as maybe you'll think about it, and of course you can always email us at members@chf.bc.ca. Oh, they're coming in right now. So adapt some of the meeting tools on the Chfbc website for online meetings, and more forums such as this, so we can hear what other co-ops are doing to be very successful. It's always great to find out what other co-ops are doing. And Tom's suggestion about actually it was yours, Anne, about the group buying package and instructions how to set up a co-op's common room to accommodate a hybrid meeting. It's really, I think that's really the key there, is that the co-op common room has to be able to facilitate as the host, and not all common rooms have the same technology availability. So it would be a great group package so that co-ops can move towards that, move the dial there. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you, Leah. So your question. So we did record tonight's session, and just because our members have been saying they want to come back and listen to it again. And we will be sharing that, Liz. Tom, if you nod your consent for a recording that it can be shared, then that's fine. We want to be shared with their board. I think it's a great idea. Liz, you send a YouTube link. Sorry, is that correct, or just?
Yeah, we'll have it up probably in the future here, and maybe next week. But yeah, we'll put it up on YouTube, and we can send out the link to everybody.
Okay.
After we take out anything I said that could get me in trouble.
I need to do some editing. No. So yeah, we're happy to do that. I know we also talked about those resources. So at the beginning of the meeting, so I can add those to the chat box now. So just give me a second for that.
We did combine a number of resources, like Tom said, making that connection between if the relationship is a landlord-tenant, those kinds of things, even if it's not specifically about the co-op, but you have a similar relationship with your members, then looking at those resources has certainly been helpful, and we think it can help you as well. And some of those resources do include some of the work that was done by our partner at Housing Central BC Not-for-Profit Housing Association and the provincial health orders, Landlord BC. There's a number of resources that really sort of feed into helping you with your co-op governance in this sort of transitioning period. So Liz, over to you.
Awesome. All right. So thanks, Michelle and Tom, for everything that you've shared with us tonight. We did want to quickly remind everyone of our amazing education conference we have coming up next week. The theme this year is on mental health and well-being, and we're really, really excited about it. We have lots of great workshops and amazing facilitators lined up, so we would love to see you all there. Information to sign up and register is on our website, and I believe Tom was going to say a few words as well about the conference if you have a minute.
Do you have the lineup of workshops handy, or is that?
There is some here, yeah.
Thanks, Liz and Michelle. I did want to say just a couple of things about it, because I'm imagining that some people might be a bit surprised and I guess in a couple of respects. One, the team has been pretty bold in reimagining the format for an education conference for like literally 20 plus years. You know, the way to hold an education conference was to put everybody in a hotel for an entire day where you'd have a couple of workshops, maybe a plenary, you know, lunch together, and we moved that online pretty successfully, but it still meant people giving up an entire day on a weekend. And some of the feedback we got from members was that was a lot to ask, and the experience of being online for an entire day took its toll, right? A bit exhausting and stressful. So the team just unbundled that, and they've actually expanded the number of opportunities available, but spread them out over the course of the early evenings for an entire week. So that in itself is a bold move. But then to turn the focus of the conference to you know, mental health issues and self-care and wellness issues. It's not obvious. Some people have said it's not obvious that has a direct connection to the nuts and bolts of running a co-op, either, you know, sound management or good governance. But I think it's a very creative way of speaking to some of those issues. You know, we do pride ourselves on being communities and of taking care of each other, and we quite often forget to take care of ourselves. And if we can't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of our neighbors and our neighbors' neighbors, and build the communities that we're so proud of as part of the co-op housing movement. So this is a chance to really address some of those self-care and wellness issues that will, I think, transform people and communities in ways that will pay off over the long haul. So, you know, it's a bit of a gamble, tackling a big change in format and a big change in content or subject matter in the same conference. But I'm so proud of our team for coming up with this approach and taking that chance in the hope that members will take us up on the opportunity to pay some attention to your own self-care and mental health. So there you have it. And I'm hoping that there's still lots of time to sign up. And even during the week, you know, as the conference unfolds, time to take advantage of one of those sessions from Monday through Friday. I think it's going to be an awesome experience, and I hope you'll join us.